I remember the day my eldest son finally understood why we spend so much time with our hands in the dirt. He was looking at a single plant in our backyard, a vine that had grown so large it looked like a green wave frozen in time, and he saw a massive golden squash peeking out from under the leaves. I told him, "Son, your great-grandfather taught me how to make that plant do that. And now, I'm teaching you." That moment, right there, is why I do this. It's not just about the food. It's about the story we tell our children through the land. I'm starting today's story with the harvest because I want you to see exactly what's possible when you stop following the modern way and start following the legacy way. We are talking about 15 pounds of food from a single seed. Imagine that. That's enough to feed your family for weeks, to fill your freezer, and to never have to look at those overpriced, plastic-wrapped vegetables at the store again. But before we dive into the dirt, we have to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. In some parts of the country, folks call everything a squash, while others might call them zucchini, courgettes, or even pumpkins. Here, for this specific trick, I'm talking about the real heavy producers. The cucurbita pepo or cucurbita maxima. These are your summer squashes like crookneck or your hardy winter varieties like Hubbard. It's important to identify your seeds correctly. You might see wild gourds growing near fences that look similar, but be very careful. Those can be bitter and even harmful if eaten. Here at the Horta Sem Segredo family, we only grow what we know. If you're ever in doubt, don't consume it and check with a reliable local source. We want to keep this tradition safe for everyone sitting at your table. Generally, on average, you can expect to see these results within 55 to 70 days, but it depends heavily on your local sun and how well you prepare the cradle for that seed. I've seen this work in the clay of the Midwest and the sand of the South. The biology is the same because the legacy trick focuses on the soul of the plant. I'm challenging you today. Don't just be a spectator. I want you to look at that patch of grass in your yard and see a 15-pound promise. I want you to feel the weight of that basket. When you realize that one plant can save you nearly $40 at the grocery store, the math of self-sufficiency starts to make a whole lot of sense. I use this trick every year, and now my kids are doing the same in our backyard. It's a proof that has stood the test of time. When my grandfather first showed me how to feed the pocket, I was skeptical. I thought he was just being old-fashioned. But when I saw his plants producing while everyone else's were wilting in the heat, I knew he had found something special. Today, I'm giving you that same challenge. Take this knowledge, plant that seed, and pass it on. This is real backyard legacy we're creating together. Are you ready to step away from the grocery aisles and into a life where you provide for your own? Because once you taste a squash grown with this much love and tradition, there is no going back. Now, I want you to think about the people you're going to share this harvest with. That's where the true value lies. Before we move into how I actually found this secret, I want you to commit to this. This is the year your garden changes for good. I remember one sweltering July afternoon back in the early 90s, a time when the world felt a bit slower and the secrets of the earth were still whispered from fathers to sons. My own father's garden in the city was a graveyard of good intentions that year. The heat had been relentless, and his squash plants looked like sad, wilted umbrellas, struggling to produce anything larger than a golf ball. I remember the look of quiet frustration on his face every time he checked the soil. He was doing everything by the book, buying the expensive fertilizers and watering on a strict schedule, yet the harvest was a ghost. But then, we took a trip down to my grandfather's place in the country, and that was the day the backyard legacy truly began for me. My grandfather, Silas, was a man of few words but deep, earthy wisdom. While the rest of the neighborhood was watching their gardens turn to straw under the punishing sun, Silas was harvesting monsters. I'm talking about squash so large and vibrant, they looked like they'd been plucked from a fairy tale. I followed him out to his patch, my small boots crunching on the dry grass, and I asked him the question that had been burning in my mind. "Grandpa, why is yours so big and Dad's so small?" He stopped, leaned on his weathered hoe, and looked at me with those kind, crinkled eyes. "Your dad is trying to force the earth to work for him, son," he said, his voice as warm as the summer air. "But I'm just giving the earth what it needs to take care of itself. Let me show you what's really going underneath that vine." He knelt down in the dirt. He never minded getting his knees dirty, saying that the soil was just yesterday's memories, and he carefully pulled back a layer of old straw and leaves. He didn't show me a chemical label or a fancy gadget. Instead, he showed me the feeding pocket. It was a discovery that felt like finding buried treasure. He had dug a deep hole right under the center of that plant weeks before he ever put a seed in the ground, and he had filled it with what he called the family dowry, kitchen scraps, old compost, and a bit of aged manure from the neighboring farm. It was a pocket of life that stayed cool and moist while the surface world was baking. "This is the trick, son," he whispered. "You don't just plant a seed, you plant a legacy. You build a home so rich that the plant has no choice but to be legendary." That discovery changed everything for me. It wasn't just a gardening tip. It was a revelation about how we treat the things we love. I remember the first time I tried it on my own, years later, when I finally had a little patch of dirt behind my first house. I dug that pocket, feeling my grandfather's presence in every shovel of dirt. I filled it with the same legacy mix, and I waited. The feeling of seeing those first giant blossoms the size of my hand, glowing like golden lanterns, is something I'll never forget. But the real emotional proof, that came years later when my own daughter ran into the kitchen, her face streaked with dirt and a smile that could light up a city, dragging a squash that was nearly half her size. "Look, Daddy, I found the treasure." That's the moment you realize this isn't just about vegetables. It's about the connection that skips through generations. My kids are doing the same thing now in our backyard, and every time we weigh a 7-pound zucchini or a massive Hubbard squash, I feel Silas smiling down on us. We've hit that 15-pound mark per plant more times than I can count, and it all goes back to that one dusty afternoon and the secret of the feeding pocket. This trick is the reason my family hasn't bought a squash in over a decade. We save hundreds of dollars a year, sure, but the real economy is the peace of mind knowing we are self-sufficient. You see, the grocery store wants you to believe that growing food is hard, that you need their chemicals and their miracle sprays. But they don't know Silas. They don't know the power of a legacy built on simple, old-school wisdom. When you see your own plants exploding with life, reaching that 15-pound promise without a single drop of toxic fertilizer, you feel a sense of liberation that is hard to put into words. It's a quiet victory over the rising costs of living and a loud declaration that you can provide for your own. I rediscovered this secret because I listened to a man who understood the heartbeat of the backyard. And today, I'm so incredibly grateful that I can pass that heartbeat on to you and your family. We are building something that lasts, one feeding pocket at a time. Now that you've heard the story of where this wisdom comes from, it's time to roll up our sleeves and build that legacy in your own backyard. My grandfather used to say, "You don't just plant a seed, you prepare a cradle. If the cradle is cold and empty, the baby won't grow. But if it's warm, rich, and full of life, that plant will reward your family with an abundance you never thought possible." This is the D stage of our journey, the deep dive into the technical old-school backyard trick that turns a $3 packet of seeds into a $150 harvest. We are going to build what I call the legacy feeding pocket. Before we dig, I want to address something Garden Grace shared recently. She said, "I tried growing squash last year, but my seeds just sat there and rotted in the ground. It was so discouraging." Grace, I want to welcome you into our family of gardeners because what you experienced is something my own father struggled with for years. Usually, seeds rot because the soil is too cold or too wet, or they weren't tucked into their cradle correctly. Grace, the steps I'm about to show you, especially the hill method, are exactly how you're going to fix that. Here is a simple 3-step check for you. 1. Wait until the soil feels warm to your touch, not just the air. 2. Ensure your drainage is perfect by building the mound I'm about to describe. 3. Don't overwater those seeds before they wake up. Try this, Grace, and I promise your kids will be helping you carry that heavy harvest in no time. Now, let's get to the work. First, variety selection. As I mentioned, we are focusing on cucurbita pepo. You can find these seeds at any local hardware store or garden center for about $3 to $4.50. Don't be fooled by the fancy hybrid labels that cost 10 times more. A good heirloom variety like Black Beauty zucchini or yellow crookneck is all you need for this legacy trick. Step 1 is the deep dig. Find a spot in your yard that gets at least 8 hours of sun. You're going to dig a hole that is 18 inches wide and 18 inches deep. I know it sounds like a lot of work for one plant, but remember, we aren't just planting, we are investing. At the bottom of this hole, we place the legacy foundation. This is where you put your brown carbon materials. Old, shredded cardboard, no glossy ink, dried leaves, or even a few handfuls of straw. This layer acts like a sponge, holding moisture deep underground so your plant doesn't wilt when the August heat hits. Step 2 is layering the wealth. On top of that cardboard, I want you to put about 4 inches of kitchen scraps. Potato peels, coffee grounds, old lettuce. This is the fuel. My grandfather used to call this burying the groceries. Then, you're going to add about 6 inches of what I call the heart. This is composted manure. You can buy a bag of steer manure for about $2 at most farm stores, or if you have a neighbor with horses or chickens, they'll usually give it to you for free just to get it off their hands. This is the cheapest way to get high-quality nutrients. Mix that manure with a bit of your native soil. Step 3 is the mound of hope. Fill the rest of the hole with a mix of topsoil and compost until you have a hill that sits about 4 to 6 inches above the ground level. This is what I told Grace about. This hill ensures that when it rains, the water drains away from the neck of the plant, preventing rot, while the deep roots can still reach down into that feeding pocket we just built. This is the way my family has always done it, and it's the secret to that 15-pound harvest. Finally, the planting. Use the rule of 3. Poke 3 holes about an inch deep in the top of your mound, spaced 3 inches apart. Drop 1 seed in each. We plant 3 because, in life and in the garden, it's always good to have a backup plan. Once they are about 4 inches tall, you'll pick the strongest one and snip the others. This ensures that the champion of the mound has all that legacy nutrition to itself. Economically, let's look at the real numbers. You spent maybe $4 on seeds and $2 on a bag of manure if you couldn't find it for free. That's a $6 investment. One plant, following this method, on average produces 15 pounds of squash. At $2.00 a pound for organic squash at the store, that's $30 of value from one plant. If you have space for 5 mounds, You've just produced $150 of food for a $10 investment. That is real economy, and that is a real gift to your family's budget. Now that the cradle is built and the seeds are tucked in, the real magic starts to happen as the vines begin to run. But how do you keep them from getting sick or being eaten by bugs without using toxic sprays? That's what we're going to cover next. Seeing those vines start to stretch out across your yard is one of the most rewarding sights a gardener can witness. It's like watching a green marathon where every runner is carrying a golden prize. But this is also the moment where many folks start to panic. They see a leaf turn yellow or they spot a strange bug, and they think the whole legacy is about to crumble. My grandpa used to say, "A garden doesn't need miracles. It just needs the shadow of the gardener." That means your presence and a few simple, old-school habits are all it takes to cross the finish line of that 15-pound harvest. The first thing we need to master is watering. My father had a very strict rule that he called the dry hair policy. He'd say, "Never get the lady's hair wet," meaning the leaves. If you use a sprinkler or a hose and spray the foliage of your squash plants, you're practically inviting powdery mildew to come and live in your backyard. Instead, we water the feet. You pour that water directly onto the mound we built, right into that feeding pocket. Because we have that deep layer of organic matter, the soil will hold on to that moisture like a sponge. In general, your plants need about an inch of water a week, but during those blazing July afternoons, you might see the leaves wilt a bit. Don't panic. That's just the plant's way of taking a nap to conserve energy. If they are still wilted in the cool of the morning, that's when you know they're truly thirsty. To keep that moisture where it belongs, we use the backyard blanket. This is just a thick layer of straw or dried grass clippings spread around the base of the plant. It keeps the soil cool, prevents weeds from stealing your plant's inheritance, and keeps the actual squash from sitting on damp dirt, which can lead to rot. We want our harvest to look like it belongs in a museum, not a compost pile. Now, let's talk about the uninvited guests, the squash bugs and the vine borers. I remember my grandmother sitting on a little stool in the garden with a roll of duct tape. She'd look for those tiny, bronze-colored eggs on the underside of the leaves and just tape them away. It's a 5-minute job that saves your entire season. It's a tradition of vigilance. If you see a vine suddenly look like it's dying while the others are fine, you might have a borer. My grandpa's old trick was to take a sewing needle and carefully poke it into the base of the stem to stop the pest, then bury that part of the vine in a little extra dirt so it could grow new emergency roots. It's about being resilient, just like our ancestors were. To keep the momentum going, every 2 weeks I give my plants what I call legacy tea. I take a bucket of water, throw in a shovelful of aged manure or compost, let it sit for a day, and then pour the tea around the base. This mid-season boost is what pushes a plant from a decent harvest to that legendary 15-pound mark. On average, you should start picking your squash when they are firm and the color is deep. Don't let them get the size of a baseball bat, they lose their flavor. The secret to a 15-pound total is picking them often. The more you harvest, the more the plant will try to produce. It's a beautiful cycle of abundance. Let's look at the real economy one last time. If you follow this cradle and care method, and you have just 4 plants, you are looking at 60 pounds of organic, nutrient-dense food. At the supermarket, that would cost you over $120. Tell me your story, and let's keep this tradition alive for the next generation. Until next time, keep your hands dirty and your heart full. Your legacy is waiting just beneath the soil,